Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think that maybe the main question that we have to deal this day, this panel, although we can speak regionally about a lot of other questions, is let's say the future of Syria in a under regional perspective. And I would claim that for some years, Syria reflected the main rivalries and phenomena at the area, although Syria is not a central state historically. It's not a central state at the mock-up, at the composition of the Middle East at the last decades or the last even century. The story of Syria, I would say, is a story of an artificial entity that was founded in Versailles Convention after the First World War, while most of the people didn't know that they are Syrians, and while when Syria got its independence, most of its citizens didn't feel the Syrian nationalism or something like that. But by the way, at the first parliament of Syria, most of the members were Turkish speakers, not Arabic speakers even. And they had a lot of questions over the borders of Syria, for example. A lot of Syrians didn't get then, and even today to some extent, get the notion of Lebanon in its border, because this was another artificial invention of after the First World War. And it's not accidental that at the first decades of Syria, it was a very shaky entity with a lot of change and coup d'etats in its regime. And only in 1963 and on, it became more stable, not because of legitimacy of the main power, mostly because it became a kind of tyranny or dictatorship under the Ba'ath party rule. So that was the story until 2011. Relatively stable, but still we spoke at that time about a place that reflected phenomena in other places, such as Iraq, for example, until 2003, where a minority of Alawites ruled the majority of Sunnis, about 73% of the population, where there were some centers of more wealth inside Syria, but in many areas were relatively in poverty, many areas were peripheral, and all the way of handling things was a kind of dictatorship way, okay? A lot of treaties, backdoors, and other packages of deals with different sections of the population. And all of that in many ways collapsed in 2011, right at the start of 2011. I would claim here that that was a second wave of the events of Iraq, about 8 years before, after the American invasion into Iraq, which collapsed the artificial composition of Iraq under Saddam Hussein, which was also a minority regime, a dictatorship minority regime. And that's how it started. Very fast during 2011 and strongly from 2012 and on, it became not only a Syrian issue, but also a regional issue, or even more than regional issue, because many players at the area and to some extent in the global arena thought that in Syria there is a chance to win some goals, each side from his side. From the point of view of the Sunni states, I mean the Gulf states and so on, Saudi Arabia, JCC states and so on, they thought that this is a good idea or good opportunity to get off Assad's regime, the pro-Iranian, pro-Russian and so on, and to get more influence in the area of Syria, not because they thought that in Syria they have a lot of money that hidden below the ground or somewhere, but more as a geopolitical game more than anything else. So the first players that got in were the JCC states, okay, with support of, to some extent, of the United States, which I'll speak about the global players in a moment, and they backed the different kind of opposition that started. Most of the opposition started or on local basis or different nationalistic ideologic backed opposition, not very extremist at the start. Okay, the extremism came along the way of the civil war. From the other side, there were another player, which was the regime itself, which was absolutely surprised, by the way, by the size of the rising and the riots and the manifestation along Syria. And this regime was backed directly and from the start by Iran, Hezbollah, and what we call the resistance axis, or they call the resistance axis, or the radical axis, and to some extent at the start, and then later in a wider way by Russia. Why Russia got in? For, I would say, 3 reasons along the way. The first one, because Assad was the last client that Russia is a patron of it along the Middle East. And it came after Russia felt that it had been cheated at Libya, the Muammar Gaddafi case. Second, so to manifest its power as a patron. Second, they have bases inside Syria, and they wanted to keep it, mostly the aerial base in Khamaimim and the military port at Tartus. Third, it's a kind of show for their munition. And if some of you know the Russian economy really built on mostly energy, gas and oil, weapons, and to some extent civilian nuclear energy, which is another kind of energy, not much more than that. So if the weapon industry can make a show of its capability inside Syria, that can be good. And the last thing is, of course, geopolitics, in the geopolitical way, maybe by manifest their capabilities inside Syria, they can sneak into some other areas in the Middle East, which are much more wealthier and so on. And by that gain some power at the global story. So I would claim that within the years 2013 and on, it became more and more regional and more global issue. And that's made this very complex situation between the different parties, made a kind of almost stalemate for years inside Syria, while from one side, I forgot another party, so I'll get into it in a moment. From one side, the regime, which are extremely backed heavily by Russia, by Hezbollah, by Quds Force under Soleimani from Iran, and by Shiite militias and so on. And from the other side, the opposition, which became along the time less and less nationalistic, or less radical, and more radicalized into the extreme Islam kind of opposition. Still backed by JCC states, less and less by the US, and the less and less support of the US led into the final outcome of Syria last year, or last year and a half, that at the end, if you see the map of today, the regime, the Assad regime, gained back the control minus in most of Syria, about 70% of Syria. Now, at the end of this civil war, and it was a hard civil war, we're speaking about a ruined state, just to understand the numbers. About more than half of the population of Syria lost their homes. They are not living today at the house that they had when this war started. About 13 million people, between 12 to 13 million people, or half of them, approximately half, left Syria, about 6 million, and the other displaced inside Syria. Okay, they went somewhere else. The GDP per capita, or GDP of Syria, collapsed dramatically. We're speaking about a state that nobody knows exactly how to even calculate the GDP per capita, but we're speaking about less than $5,000 per capita, just to understand. Okay, it's less than Jordan, Egypt, and other places, and it's not that there are very wealthy people that are taking statistics up. And third, this is a ruined state by its infrastructure. There is no exact calculation, but for sure, we're speaking about a place where its rehabilitation needs hundreds of billions of dollars. But this money do not come. Because right now the situation is that from one side, Russia, to some extent China and Iran want to get into some rehabilitation of Syria, but they don't have, in the case of Russia and Iran, the real money to do that. And in the case of China, it's not interesting enough to get in. And from the other side, the American administration is blocking any initiative of rehabilitation of Syria from the JCC states, I mean the Arab states, or European states, or any other worldwide player that want to do something in Syria. So the situation right now is, let's call it that way, and we can elaborate about that, but it's not the main thing. Back to the dictatorship with less legitimacy of a ruined state, with a lot of munition which is spread out in many places. And if you ask me at the end, I would say that the story of Syria would go between, from one side, the fact that the population is absolutely exhausted after those years of civil war and do not want to get again into that violence, from one side, and from the other side, the fact that they have no future right now. Okay, most of the people of Syria, it's not that they are really rehabilitated and they see, I don't know, any kind of economic catalysator that would take them up into new horizons or something like that. Even there is no Rafik Hariri, like the case of Lebanon after the civil war, that would come, bring money with him and do some
also in Lebanon you don't have Rafik Hariri.
Yeah, Rafik Hariri of Lebanon that came after, of course. That came after the civil war of Lebanon, brought some rehabilitation into Lebanon and gave some horizon at that time. It didn't end well, but that was another story. At Syria, there is no person or entity or initiative at that direction. So situation of Syria probably, as long as we can see for the near future, is kind of continuation of a ruined state, quite exhausted, of a civil war that try to manage itself, I would call it that way, okay, between the bigger forces, gain some more territory, and territory I mean by the regime. And the big question that still, when speaking about the domestic arena of Syria, the main question that still is around is whether the Americans would continue to support what they call the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is a composition of Kurds and Arabs from the Euphrates River area and northern Syria, what you see in green, I think, which is almost another entity these days.
The orange.
Okay?
The orange.
Orange. Which is today 20% of the Syrian territories. It's not nothing. It has some resources at that area, and this is a question for the future. So if you ask me about Syria itself, and I will try to connect it to regional issues, I think that I do not see a real rehabilitation of Syria in the near future. The only way to get there is a kind of political process that I can't see in the foreseeable future for now. Political process is another words for taking us out of the regime in some process, and I don't see that happened. The main change can come from the eastern side of Syria, or by American withdrawal and lack of support to the SDF, or by other things such as rise of new ISIS or stuff like that. And I think that Syria is in a, not a stalemate, I don't know if to say that word, but in a, or continuation of the bad situation, or even in deterioration into the future. To Israel, for a moment, and I'll speak strategically and not get into the operational side, it's hard to say that, but to some extent, the civil war in Syria, it will be hard to say served some interest of Israel, but to some extent, took some threats from Syria when speaking about the Israeli perspective. First of all, the Syrian army was relatively collapsed during those years. By the way, one of the first things that Bashar Assad understood at the start of the civil war, that his huge Syrian army is ineffective, okay, to oppress this civil war, first. Second, Syria had a huge a chemical agent arsenal, the biggest and the widest in the Middle East, and one of the widest of the world, and it's almost disappeared completely. Third, the collapsed Syria of today has no, let's call it, strategic assets or demands when we speak about the Golan or other things. So that was the good things into it. The bad thing into it, that under the vacuum of Syria, two bad or negative phenomena got in. The less dramatic from the Israeli perspective was the entering of Daesh, of the extremist Sunni Islam. But there was another initiative, and I think that General Lavi will speak about it in a moment, and this was the penetration of the Iranians in more massively during those years of the civil war into Syria, in attempt first to base strategic influence over Syria, then to get some money out of Syria, although don't expect for much. And third, to build first corridor to Lebanon, more based corridor to Lebanon, to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and military capabilities to attack Israel, or as they would like to, like in Yemen by the Houthis, to do that in Syria. Okay, these were the negative parts of it. So what would be the future about that issue? That depends on the Israeli policy, and on, I would say, the Israeli policy about Syria, and also about the American policy at the day after Soleimani, and I don't want to dive into that, but here, let's say that if besides the Israeli activity, there would be an American activity that would minimize or really make obstacle to the Iranian regional insurgency, and specifically at the route between Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, that can be influential. By the way, it's feasible. I'm not speaking about something which is, I don't know, unreal. Here it can be feasible. So these are questions for the future, and I think I'll stop here. And
can you just say 2 words about who was Qasem Soleimani?
This is a long story. Qasem Soleimani, the head of Quds Force, that's his formal role. But to make it simple, let's say that he was like the Israeli head of the Mossad. Okay, he was the head of the Iranian Mossad, kind of. Okay, he led all the Iranian insurgency out of Iran. Insurgency. He led all the militias, Shiite militias that worked, terror cells, Hezbollah, any activity of Iran which was not launching rockets from Iran itself, out of Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, and around the globe, was under his command. By the way, he was so central to the Iranian regime, mostly to the conservatives in the Iranian regime, that in 2009, when the riot started inside Tehran, he was the main oppressor. So he has some significance also in the domestic arena inside Iran. They elaborated him over years, by the way, to be a kind of celebrity, not only in the area, but also in Iran itself. He considered as a hero of the Iran-Iraq war, okay, from the 80s. And so he was quiet, positive, I would say, a figure inside Iran at the eyes of many Iranians, a hero, kind of a hero, warrior for Iran. But I'm not sure about all the Iranians, so don't be too impressed about the big ceremonies now. I'm not sure that all the people that stayed at home are such a big fans. The main question here is I think there are 2 questions the day after Soleimani. First, is Ismail Qaini, which was his deputy, and after you are a deputy so many years, it's not good for your character. I'm not sure that he can get into, but the main question here is what will the US do vis-a-vis Iran as a whole, and vis-a-vis the Iranian regional role. The upper hand is American. If US would decide to do a campaign against it, it doesn't matter if it's Soleimani, Ismail Qaini, or I don't know whom would come. The Iranians would have much more obstacles to do that, and I think there is such a potential, but since I'm not at the decision making of the US, it's hard to tell right now. If they would, by the way, if the US would withdraw okay, withdraw soldier, withdraw and say that we do not want to confront Iran, blah, 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 stuff like that, the interception, I was got in right way, of Soleimani can be not such a positive act, because, okay, the Iranians want to revenge, and if there wouldn't be deterrence at the start and retaliation after, if there would be something, maybe they can understand, okay, we got a hit, Iran. We got a hit, but we can make more assets over time.
Right.
So it's a big question.
Thank you, Ram. Ilan, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. First of all, it's quite difficult to speak after Ram. No, I was the head of the operational division in the Northern Command when Ram was in charge on the intelligence division of the Northern Command, and every week we had the weekly operational estimation meeting with the commander of the command, General Yair Golan, and when Ram spoke, I actually all the time, and I was new in the job, and he was already almost 2 years. When he spoke, I had to think, what will I say after Ram speaks? It's quite difficult, but I will try. I will get down to the level, to the operative level, and try to analyze the situation as I see it. First of all, until 2011, then I had the opportunity to be part of the highest command in the Northern Command. The border with Syria was the most boring border around the borders of Israel. Okay? Nothing happened, actually, from the Yom Kippur War. Okay? Although, at the same time, it was the most dangerous border. Why? Because the Syrian army was a huge army. I think that around 10 or 11 divisions, okay? Some of them, very strong one, Armor Division, well qualified, with almost 4,000 tanks, a lot of other capabilities, a well-developed maneuver capabilities, well-fired capabilities, the artillery, the artillery forces of the Syrian, the commando forces. They had 17 brigades of commandos. Imagine, okay? The IDF has one commando division. They had 17 brigades that were commando forces. And, as Ram said, well equipped with chemical capabilities that, frighten us quite a lot. So the situation has changed, and that's my first thing that I want to say, dramatically, to a better situation for us. We have to remember it, okay? At 2011, I remember, it was September 2011, when we were in a command exercise, and I had to plan the operative attack inside Syria. Our plan was to attack to the depths of Syria until the neighborhoods of Damascus. Several months later, I took the plan, put them in the safe. I think that they are locked over there until now, because I don't think that anyone thinks that we will attack and take our forces and fight all the Syrian, Russian, Sovietical lines in order to reach Damascus and in order to, search and find Assad, take him and put him in the jail or killing him in order to stop all the issues. So we have to be proportional when we are talking about this area, this border, almost 9 years later, 2020. We had a lot of thoughts around those years, what to do with Syria. Would we want to be involved inside? Is it better for us to look at the scenery in Syria and not to be involved. There were many opinions. Some thought that Assad will go after, I remember it, I don't want to quote and to say who said so. 3-4 weeks, he's going. We won't see him again. And again, we are still here with Assad, another Assad, okay? But to try to estimate the future, it's quite difficult in the Middle East. I think that it's almost impossible in the Middle East. We decide to stay out of the war. We decide that we will have, you can call it red lines or some lines, if things will happen, we will retaliate. But actually, our policy, and I'm talking about around the border, I'm leaving now all the attacks that are related to the things that are, the rockets that are being delivered on the ways from Iran to Lebanon. Around the borders, we decided to sit on the fence and not to be involved in what is happening over there. I think that one of the reasons was, as Ram said, that many forces, superpowers, and other interests were involved. And you have to be enough humble when Russia, United States, and other states that are influencing all around the world are involved in such things, and not to think that you can change the reality. I think that the second reason was Lebanon. We invaded Lebanon in 1982. Did we change anything in Lebanon? We have been over there 18 years. We went outside Lebanon. Reality in Lebanon didn't change for us. So when you think that you can change the strategic reality, you have to take in consider that things can happen otherwise than you thought in the beginning. Instead of that, there was some decisions that were taken in order to be on the safe side. On the operative level, in order to keep our interest, the IDF decided that he will change the forces around the border. The first decision was, I think, around the end of 2012 to build a new regional division in order that the eyes of this division will be only around the border and the difficulties of the border. We built a very huge obstacle in 2014, the new fence, in order to avoid clashes and penetrations inside to the Golan. We put a lot and invest a lot of money in sensors in order to detect movements around the border. Now the Golan border is much more easier to control than the Lebanon border. Okay? You don't have all the bush and all the mounted area. Most of the Golan is flat, and by good defense, good sensors, and very good intelligence, and we have, I think, on the tactical and operational level, a very good intelligence. You can control and you can act when you decide, okay? And you can mostly initiate. We have to remember that also. And another thing that we create good relationship with the population around this area. Now here, it didn't happen from the highest levels. It's actually happened on the ground. The first meetings, the first creations of relationship between us and the Syrians that lived on the border occurred on the level of the company and battalion. I remember this night when the division commander called me and told me, you know, we met some Syrian on the border, people that are injured. What do I do? I spoke with my commander, with General Golan, and the first reaction of General Golan was open the gate, let them get in. That's how we started, step by step. Nobody gave us an order. We didn't have any strategic view about this area, about the population. You remember that in Lebanon we had very good relationship with the Christians and we built a good fence. It started bottom up, step by step, and those people that were equipped from all the weapons and ammunition that were thrown all around, they were actually the first line that defended our area because they knew that they have our backup. Most of the time they were with their forces on the fence in order to prevent from the Syrian forces to deter them and to try to attack them by the back. Later on, we built systematic assistance, and the government was involved, and the IDF highest command was involved, but it started bottom up. It shows you that sometimes reality, you know, is marching from boots on the ground, not from people that are standing or sitting in those important rooms. When you are counting the incidents on the border since 2012, can someone try to guess how many incidents did we have on the border? Someone knows the number? Maybe you try to...
Until today?
Nice. Incidents in which the Syrians shoot, you know, unpurposely inside to Israel because they wanted to kill the rebels, 70 incidents, 7-0, okay? We are talking about 9 years. Incidents that other organizations like Hezbollah, Iranian militias, or proxies, not more than 10. So, is it a boring border? Or is it an interesting border? Is it a complicated border?
Sunni opposition? No.
Sunni opposition most of the time was some kinds of friends with us, okay? So when you count those incidents, you understand that we succeeded to keep our interest around the border. Think of that. An attrition war around the border of the Golan could broke up. It didn't happen. Mostly I think because we were very precautious. Second, you need some luck, you know. It's better to have some luck. And third, I think that we put sharp lines and the other side understood. On those 60 to 70 incidents, we retaliate in a very extremist way. We killed Syrian soldiers. We destroy Syrian tanks, Syrian artillery, Syrian batteries. When even a mortar fall in the Golan accidentally. And the other side understand our lines. And when we understood that Murnia's son is walking around, so we stopped him and killed him. Those actions, I think, were understood by the other side. And Assad understood that every time that he will try to do something, he will pay high price for that. Now, if you are asking me what are the lines that we should continue to put around the borders with Syria, first of all, and I think that Lieutenant General Kochavi, the Chief of Staff, said it. First of all, to avoid any Iranian militias or proxies to be close to the border. I know that I was talking with the Russians, 80 kilometers, 60 kilometers. They have to be enough away from the border. And if they will reach the border, we will take care of them. That's a sharp line that we put, and we should keep it. The second one, any attempt to deliver or to bring accurate rockets that can cause a lot of damage. It's a day and night fighting in order to achieve it. I can't say, maybe Ran can say the percentages, I can't say that we are 100% succeeding in it, but I think that we have quite good
Outcome.
Third one, to keep our relationship with the people that are living around the border. Although today, officially, there is no, the Syrian regime took over the border areas. Although that, we know that things can be changed again. I've heard that in the last months, again in Dara, there are some kinds of starting of clashes between the Dara guys and the regime. And remember, everything started in Dara. So I'm sure that that is being handled by the people that knows to do that in order to keep our interest around the border. And we have, of course, on the strategic level, an interest that the United States will be involved in any permanent solution in Syria, and if it will happen, it will serve us on the best way. And the last one, to maintain peaceful life in the Golan. That's the target of the forces around the Golan. You have to understand that the forces on the Golan, when they are acting, they should understand every day, every hour, that one mistake can lead us to an unproportional fighting if they won't act wisely. Therefore, the forces are I won't say the best forces, because we have so many challenges, but they are the forces that suits the situation in the Golan in order to avoid things to happen, and when something is happening, to close it very quickly. I think that Israel achieved until today its goals regarding the Golan. We should continue and think in a humble way when we are dealing with Syria, with the conditions in Syria. And although it's not nice to say, but I think that the interest of Israel in general is that Syria will keep going on the same rolling stocks and not become another entity. That serves us, I think, quite good in the reality that we live in this area today.
Let's open it for questions now. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Ilan. Yes, please.
Amir Katz, Sarit, thank you very much for having us here. And some more questions for you. With regards to the attack and murder, assassination of Soleimani, in light of the attacks in the Strait of Hormuz against the ships, the attack in the Saudi facility, the attack in the green zone just recently, why is this targeted assassination so out of the realm of what's appropriate action and reaction? Why is it that the American press right now is going nuts? And maybe I'm missing something with regards to being a half American Israeli.
Maybe you should ask the American press.
Why is the targeted assassination such a big deal?
It's a big deal, but I don't think it's disproportionate to what happened, in a sense that in a world that you fight terrorism, and the next lecture on the day will speak a lot about the Iranian influence in the region. There is a great importance to carry out these kind of attacks against such a prominent figure from that commands the Shiite militias in the region, and actually to deliver a very clear message to the Iranians after all these incidents that you've mentioned, that the Americans are not going to tolerate these kind of incidents, and that the Iranians cannot do everything they want in the region. So in my very Israeli point of view, okay, I think that this assassination, though all the risks, and of course there are many risks, was important. Because if we all cover ourselves with a blanket and imagine that there are no Iranians on the Israel's borders, and there are no Iranians that are planning to attack Americans, they will not disappear. The Iranian Islamic Revolution was planning and is planning as we speak, before Qasem Soleimani and after Qasem Soleimani, to fight the American influence in the region. There is no doubt about that, and to fight Israel later on when they will feel that the United States is not behind it anymore.
So it is proportional, you say?
I would not use the word proportionate, because I think this is wrong when you need to speak about terror to measure it this way. I think that it was the right thing to do. Okay, even if it is disproportionate, no civilians were killed. This was against an archi-terrorist. And this is part of the campaign against terror. Yes, Anna.
I'm from the Jerusalem Post. A few questions for all three of you. Again, on Qasem Soleimani. He was very active, always traveling, and I'm sure military intelligence caught wind of his travels. Can you touch on that, about how active he was? Why didn't Israel take the opportunities to take him out? Why leave it to the Americans? And another question is there any difference in how the military looks at the northern border now as opposed to 5 years ago? A difference maybe with the different chief of staff?
So, Qasem Soleimani, Ram, Ilan, the northern border.
First of all, I'm not talking with General Zehavi every day, so I don't know his vision. But I can say, I will start with Qasem Soleimani. I think that the real change with regarding to Qasem Soleimani is that he created, or he wanted to create, a change from two fronts to one arena. When we looked at the wars 10 years ago, our vision was that when we are fighting Lebanon, probably Syria will be out of the game. Okay? And if we will fight Syria, Lebanon will be out of the game. I think that the real change that Qasem Soleimani and the Iranians and Hezbollah led is that if a war will break up, it will be probably a war with one arena, meaning to say we will fight here in Lebanon and we will have to fight in Syria. Does it mean that we will attack Damascus? We will maneuver to Damascus, as I told you that we had a plan? I don't know, I don't think so. But there won't be any peaceful situation in one of the fronts, okay? I think that that's the main change regarding this area. The second issue is that Qasem Soleimani knew to take the strong points of the Iranian capabilities and to bring them to this area. Okay? Iran doesn't have tanks, almost doesn't have any air fighters due to many years of embargo. And I think that Qasem Soleimani knew to build a new conceptual way of fighting with the assets that he had in his hands. Okay? Big firepower, or a lot of firepower, now even accurate. Militia forces that know to do limited maneuvering, but to cause high price to the forces that they are fighting. And by that, creating against us a problem that can challenge us when we are coming and bringing our modern maneuvering forces that are exposed to these capabilities.
Ram, would you like to?
Okay, Soleimani, very easy. Let's take it by business lexicon. Okay, civilian business lexicon. The manager of all the Iranian insurgency outside of Iran. Okay, that was his job. Everything that Iran did in the insurgency activity, not the political activity, sometimes even political, but insurgency activity out of Iran, he managed the body, the unit that did it. Okay, that was his role. So he has a lot of significance in it, but it depends. There is a unit, so time will tell. And as I spoke before, it depends on bigger forces, not only on Iran. First. Second, why didn't it happen before? All the time you are doing calculations. Okay, sometimes you prefer not to get to the head, but to play with others and to get an effect because of the outcome of such an act. But it depends on the situation. Why America did that? Because he was involved in killing hundreds of Americans, mostly in Iraq. Okay, that's the story. And they understood, that's what published, that he wanted to start, before the interception, he wanted to start a new campaign against the Americans inside Iraq and in other places. So it was a kind of an interception before, okay, a preemptive act. For the calculation of Israel vis-a-vis Syria and Lebanon, I think that the last 10 years even made a change from a front or an area where you have a state and a collapsed state, which means Lebanon, with big guerrilla inter-organization, to a place where you have a collapsed state, Syria, and the main thing that you have to deal with is a combination of half state, many players, and big forces that get in and bring quality or capabilities, such as Iranian capabilities. So that's the main story. So if you'll ask me, today the main story for the northern arena is the Iranian axis and its players. Okay, not the Syrian army, not the state stuff. By the way, almost all surrounding Israel, that's the case. Weak state, kind of weak state, with other organization, and you have to play between this situation.
Yes, please.
I'd like to focus, if I may, on the Kurdish influence, or how it affects the whole situation. I know that in the past, prior to 2011, there was some sort of, especially in Iraq, Israel had some sort of influence or some support given to the Kurds. Now, in the Syrian Syrian position now, how do the Kurds? What's the Kurdish position, especially with the so-called vis-a-vis the American abandonment of the Kurds and the Turkish influence? If you can sort of give us a broader picture of the situation.
So, first of all, the Kurds, although they are Kurds, all of them, the Kurds in Syria and Iraq are not completely the same. Okay, these are different families and so on, not exactly the same. So at Iraq, they have their autonomy, And they are strategically striving into be almost a different state. Okay, they even got into such a question about a year and a half ago, but okay, for now they are still a kind of an autonomous area with the idea of a state. At Syria, we're in a different situation. The Kurds of Syria see themselves not as completely different entity, but as basically Syrians. What they want is more autonomous rights, okay, and management for themselves. That's the main issue. Now, the civil war got them into a situation which I'm not sure that they predicted, and the invasion or the phenomena of ISIS led them to fight directly the main enemy of the West and other forces, and made a combination of American, Western, Arab interest with the Kurds as the best force on the ground that's supporting them. And that's made, you see, that area which controlled by what they call the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is under the command of the Kurds, but half and half, Arabs, Sunni Arabs and Kurds. They are absolutely dependent on American support. There are some others, okay? But Israel is not a main component here. The American support will doom them as an organized force, or will support them for a long time as an organized force. So this is the question. You know, U.S. did some changes in statements and activity during the last few years about Syria. As long as they will backed by the U.S., I think we will see some kind of that map. I mean, some sovereignty of the Kurds. By the way, at the civilian level, they made quite impressive democracy on the ground itself, at the local level, regional level. But for how long, it's a good question. About Turkey, very simple. Turkey sees the Syrian Kurds as enemy. Very easy.
We have time for 2 more questions, and then we'll go for a break. Yes?
Assessment. Are the Americans going to leave Iraq and Syria, and as a result, Iran is going to increase its penetration into Syria?
רוצה להמר? או שאני אתחיל?
We can gamble about it. But,
Huh?
So let me rephrase the question, okay? What will happen, what's the implications would be if the Americans will decide to leave Syria?
eventually, I think that we will have to go to war. Okay?
Who's we?
We, meaning to say Israel. It's not me. I'm already,
No, you can recommend on it.
He's doing reserves with Alma.
Look, we are counting down the general manner. Although I talked and I said that, the border is quite quiet and boring and so on, if the Iranians will continue in that way, so what? We will still stay here and wait? Look what happens. Lebanon, Syria. We didn't talk about Jordan. What will happen if Jordan will collapse tomorrow? And who said that Jordan won't collapse tomorrow? What keeps Jordan alive?
Us.
Yeah. 240 kilometers of border. No man's zone. Okay? It's not. So, about that, I'm not so optimistic. Okay? That's my view.
Okay.
It's a realistic scenario.
First of all, I think that it's hard to...
Was the letter sent
Yeah.
to...
No, the letter was,
was
a
a-
big mistake.
Mistake?
Yeah, really. No.
No, it was
mistake.
a misinterpretation
Yes.
of a
Some says
tactical
that it was
letter
a
to a
trick.
strategic
No, it's a tactical
level.
letter. It's not the issue, but but there is another thing. No, but to your question, strategically, the question is that it's hard to predict the American, let's say that thing, it's hard to predict the American policy. If you ask me as much as I can predict it, after many talks, with different echelons of the American administration, if the president wouldn't decide suddenly to do that, all the professional echelons, National Security Council,
Right.
Pentagon and so on, wouldn't recommend on that. would not recommend on that. So I believe that they wouldn't leave now. I think that maybe they would reinforce. It depends on many things. I think the Americans have a lot of assets or cards to play right now. It gives them an upper hand, that last act, but it depends what they will do. And in the near future, I do not see them withdraw. First of all, it's not such big resources. Yeah? In Syria, we're speaking about a few hundreds, and in Iraq, we're speaking about 5,200 soldiers as a whole. So I think they would keep the deployment, and the strategic level of policy is much more important.
Nir Baum's here with us from Tel Aviv University. I wanted to ask something. Nir Baum is also an expert to what is happening today in Syria, so thank you for being here.
Ram, mainly for you, you've mentioned that Syria was born just like other countries in the Middle East and in the context of the post-colonial powers, and in some ways an artificial state, which also helps explain all these interesting maps that we have here and the sectarian dimension of a lot of what we've seen in the last decade. So you have these colors and control that has to do with sometimes ethnic groups, proxies, and this has been a lot of what you spoke about. But in the last few years, and certainly in the last few months, we've also seen something different, and I wonder if you can just relate to that. And I'm talking about these sort of post-sectarian demonstrations.
Yeah.
The second wave of some have called of the Arab Spring, demonstrations in both in Iran itself, in Iraq and in Lebanon against Iran. Shias who are going against Iran, young people who are basically understanding that this sectarian dimension is really killing them. And in a way are also saying, look, we want our country back. We don't want to die for Lebanon or for Israel. We want to live for Iran. And I wonder what you make of all of this, because this is relatively new, relatively interesting, and certainly have some ramification of this sort of new Middle East.
I think these are interesting seeds, but it wouldn't change the situation. I think that as we saw the protest in Lebanon that started and didn't continue, I think that in Iraq, okay, it started and let's see what would happen, but these kinds of demonstration has no organized leadership, has no real backing, and there is a real fear of the vast majority of the population to get back into the last very bad decade. So if you ask me at the end, these are seeds, maybe for some future, but it wouldn't change the system. And the system is all sectarian, or center and periphery, very, very strict ones, with all the problems that we know of the Middle East. And I can't see the change significantly in the near future.
Ram and Ilan, thank you very much. I feel that this panel was very enlightening, and even though I follow daily on what's going on in Syria and in the region, I must say that I learned a lot from both of you. So I just wanted to give you a small present.
Something to have at home, yeah.
Yes, it's pretty heavy. This is Cliff Sobin's book. Cliff Sobin, the author, is sitting here with us, and he wrote a book about, how should I put it, Cliff?
About the northern borders. How did people get here? Why are they staying? Or what are the problems they're facing?
And the book is composed of personal stories, by the way, included of myself and Yael's. And thank you very much. This is for you. Thank you.